Secretary of State Rex Tillerson is in Moscow for talks on cooperation with Russia under a diplomatic cloud after President Donald Trump ordered a missile strike in retaliation for an alleged Syrian chemical weapon attack. Syria is just one issue on the agenda, with sanctions against Russia, situations in Crimea and Ukraine, and accusations of meddling in the American election, all up for discussion. To consider these issues and more, I'm very happy to be joined in the studio by Cui Hongjian, Director of the Department of European Studies of the China Institute of International Studies, and Rick Dunham, visiting scholar with Tsinghua University. We shall also speak via satellite to Professor Alexander Lukin, a senior political commentator in Moscow. That's our topic. This is a dialogue. I'm Yang Rui. But before we start our discussion, let's take a look at this.
When U.S. President Donald Trump took office, his pro-Russia words led to expectations his election victory would be the turning point of long-strained relations between Russia and the U.S. Russian media even celebrated the new man in the White House. On his campaign trail, Mr. Trump spoke fondly of Russian President Vladimir Putin and expressed willingness to raise cooperation between the U.S. and Russia. And this was not a one-sided wish. In the early days of Mr. Trump in office, the meeting between the two leaders was highly expected. But the honeymoon ended even before it started. President Trump's attitude towards Moscow was chillier amid heightened scrutiny in Washington over his camp's ties to Russia. The sudden departure of Michael Flynn as National Security Advisor in February and the revelations of Attorney General Jeff Sessions' meetings with the Russian ambassador are among a string of controversies apparently tying the Trump administration to Russian interests. Friday's U.S. missile strike in Syria has added fuel to the fire.
Rededicate ourselves to holding to account any and all who commit crimes against the innocents anywhere in the world.
Russia, fueled by Washington's actions, accused the U.S. of crossing the red line. And with the U.S. Navy deploying a carrier group towards the western Pacific Ocean near the Korean Peninsula, already tense U.S.-Russia relations have been put further in the dark side. As Tillerson is in Moscow now, how will this bilateral relation go on?
Gentlemen, the Russian foreign minister says the United States has crossed the red line in Syria. But who has crossed the red line? President Obama accused President Assad 3 years ago of using chemical weapons, killing hundreds of them on the city proper of Damascus. Now, a couple of days ago, a similar scenario occurred. Very brutal killing of children and women alike. Now, on the other hand, there's a conspiracy, quote unquote, that the missile strike against the use of chemical weapons in Syria was yet another piece of evidence to testify the buddy-buddy relationship between President Putin and his American counterpart, helping divert public attention from the scrutiny of the media against the alleged ties to Russia. Now, what do you think of these messy situations here?
Yeah, exactly. Now it's in a very, very messy situation because we need to understand now, especially for both two countries, especially for Mr. Trump and Mr. Putin, internally they do have some troubles, and also at the same time, at the beginning, the Syria issue was regarded as a very, very good chance for both two countries to get new relations, especially if we still remember what's the word from Mr. Trump during his election campaign. But now, I think that it looks like a space ladder and limitation more for this Mr. Trump want to change or have with Russia. Because as we know, maybe previously for Mr. Trump and his team, we regarded this traditional or professional way to deal with the relations with Russia in the wrong way. But now, maybe the question for Mr. Trump and his team is, professional way is a professional way, even it's wrong.
And do you think the use of chemical weapons, to put it in a nasty way, was a gold standard opportunity for President Trump to keep a distance from the current investigation into the alleged ties with Russia? I mean, after the ouster of Michael Flynn, his former national security advisor, and the current Chief Justice was also under investigation for the alleged contact with the Russian embassy. What do you think of this dramatic change? Was it a game changer?
Well, in some ways it gave Donald Trump the moral high ground to change his position and to launch the missiles at Syria. But I think to start, we have to go back to U.S. domestic politics to try to figure out the background for this. You had Donald Trump is under siege because of his campaign's ties with Russian hackers, with Russian officials. You have the situation of a very unpopular president and an opportunity for him to look very presidential and strong. And so I think that's the beginning of this. You also have to look at an unknown Syria policy. You've had it change almost day to day over whether one day the administration last week was saying that the current regime in Syria, we can live with them in power. And then you had the chemical attack, and then you had a reversal. So I think you have to look in the context of the U.S. domestic politics and the battles within the White House between the Bannon wing of the White House and the Trump family wing of the White House to understand the decision-making here.
Before we take a closer look at other major issues on the table between Rex Tillerson and his Russian counterpart, do you think the United States has a clear and persistent strategy other than the changeable policy options about the Assad regime? For a while on the campaign trail, President Trump-elect, or the presidential hopeful, said he would consider proactively relocating American embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Now, nothing was done at this moment. For a while, he said our overwhelming goal was to fight ISIL or Daesh in Syria. Now, and he also said at the same time he would not fight on the two fronts against ISIL and the Assad regime. He violated his promise time and again. So can we take this president very seriously? Does he have any serious strategy about the Middle East?
Yeah, it's, I think, a very interesting issue, because if we look at the history of the policy from the United States on Middle East, we can find maybe there is not, the fixed strategy for every president of the United States, but still. But I think that there are some, principles from it.
What are the principles?
Yeah, for example, how about the interests of the United States? For example, for the former President, Mr. Obama, even some observers regarded this kind of policy from Mr. Obama on Middle East to keep a kind of, controlled chaos in that region. Once this situation keep going on, certainly there will be a requirement to the United States from these regional countries. So to keep the interest, to keep the advantage of the United States in that region will be the principle. So that's a problem that so far, even for, the complaint from especially Russian side said that because of there is not a clear strategy from the United States, but only some principles, especially a kind of principle of American first. So that would be a very, very deep root cause for this instability for Middle East.
Not only this, President Trump also threatened to walk away from the deal with Iran, saying he's likely to rip up the agreement about lifting the economic sanctions and to lay groundwork for development of Iran, the Persian state, which ironically had been used as a counterweight against the rise of Iraq. But the Iran-Iraq war was a very good piece of evidence. What do you think of, what are your thoughts about the Iran issue, which is part of the Middle East scenario?
Well, I think up until last week, we were pretty clear of what the Trump philosophy was with Israel, with Iran, and with Syria. He was going to be fighting against the ISIL, ISIS, the Islamic State, and in Iran, he was going to, as you said, try to rip up the agreement. The difficulty is all of these issues are interconnected, and it doesn't work unless you start solving them one by one.
Middle East is, of course, one of the major issues between Russia and the United States. And that's why I'm going to go to Alexander Lukin, yet another senior expert of Middle East studies and international affairs, for his comments on the latest development. Now, Alexander, President Putin, to express his anger, said prior to the departure of Rex Tillerson that he would not meet with the American Special Envoy. What's going to happen next? Do you think he would be given a cold shoulder? I mean, do you think Secretary Tillerson would be given a cold shoulder by our president?
Well, we don't really know what's going to happen because the talks are still going on. But the problem with this administration is that it looks that it wanted to change its policy, and that's why people in Russia were very enthusiastic about it. But now it turns out that it's not allowed to do it, so they are going back to the traditional American course. If they are going to continue this traditional course, then relations are hardly going to be better. So maybe we can come to some local temporary agreements, but the general course on world domination, on bombing legitimate governments, of course Russia cannot support it. And neither Russia nor China, I think. So it's going to be hard, very, very tough future.
Secretary Tillerson urges President Putin to consider carefully, also by the European Union and G7 club, that Moscow should sever the diplomatic relations and official support for the Assad regime. In return for this, there are strong indications that the current economic sanctions against Russia would be lifted very quickly as a reward. What do you think of the prospect? Alexander?
Are you asking me?
Yes, I'm asking you. I'm talking to you.
Yes, yes. Well, sanctions is not a big problem here. I mean, it's not going to change anything. So there are two parts of sanctions. One is that some Russian government officials are not allowed to go to foreign countries, which is, I think, it's even good because they should spend more time in Russia. And second is that sanctions against banks, which is harmful, but not very much harmful. I mean, the American sanctions. So it's not a problem. We are not talking about sanctions, lifting sanctions. We are talking about general approach to the world, like. Because, as I said, there were hopes, and President Trump was talking about it, that we can, he said like 200 times that he wanted to have good relations with Russia, with Mr. Putin, he wanted to...
Excuse me, Alexander Lukin, excuse me, with the current investigation into possible ties between President Trump's camp and your embassy in Washington, with the current accusation that Russia tried in vain to meddle with the elections on the campaign. Now, do you think, very much like the failure of the reset policy of the Obama administration, President Trump would fail once again? Because there's no basic trust between the US government and Moscow.
Well, I think all these allegations are really a part of a fight, of a struggle of the, let's say, American Washington establishment against Trump. They're of course all false. I mean, what is this accusation about? That Trump officials or campaign leaders met with Russian ambassador and officials. But this is their job. What's so wrong about it? This is all nonsense, of course. The thing is that it was used against Trump. Trump wanted to change things, maybe sincerely. But when he came to power, he was told that he was not going to do it. Otherwise, he was going to be impeached, or he would have a lot of problems. And I have a feeling that he turned out to be a very weak leader. He said, well, I'm not allowed to do it, it's dangerous, so let's turn to traditional policy. So now, from his kind of anti-establishment trend to the trend of an ordinary right-wing American Republican president, just like, say, Bush the Jr. or Ronald Reagan. with such people, it's difficult to deal. But we have no option, so we'll have to deal with them and at some point. But we're also going to kind of withstand the pressure.
Thank you so
today,
much,
President Putin's
Mr. Lukin.
spokesman, Mr. Peskov,
Thank you so much,
said that we
Mr.
are going to
Lukin.
do.
We'll get back to you pretty soon. Whatever your serious disputes about the President Assad, it seems
Okay.
you and your colleagues in the Beijing studio share at least one consensus. Everything we talk about here is domestic issues, domestic politics of the United States. So stay with us for our viewers. We'll be back in a short while. Welcome back. Mr. Lukin tried to downplay the importance of the economic sanctions, but Mr. Cui issued to maintain lid on the on the Russian foreign trade with the European Union after the Brexit.
I think that yes, now economic sanction on Russia is a big issue indeed, not only in the frame of international relations.
Are you
but also-
suggesting that it will also deliver a negative impact upon the normal trade and economic relations between Moscow and Beijing as a result of the sanctions?
To some degree.
Because some of the banks have been facing the sanctions. And
Yes,
economic-
yes. I think it give a bigger dynamic for to Russia to look eastward, which means that to have more trade and investment with China and some other Asian and Pacific economies. But another question is, especially from the logic of Western countries who impose sanctions on Russia, is how could these sanctions will attack this base of regime of Russia, and then to raise some more, unsatisfaction from public to Mr. Putin, and then there will be some perhaps possibility of regime change. I think so. But now the question is, just like also the Russian guest mentioned, that perhaps it's a little bit different, especially from nationality of Russian people, because if we look at this very, very high popularity of Mr. Putin, even after the sanction imposed by Western countries. But now, of course, the kind of a feeling of nationalism is one thing, but how could those average people to deal with the daily life is another thing.
Nobody knows clearly what's going on in Russia after demonstrations took place against him
right.
as a part of the prelude to the election of next year. Having said this, many observers in China in particular seem to enjoy a sense of relief after the missile strikes occurred, alienating Russia from the United States further, because on the campaign trail, a lot of the pro-Russian remarks by President Trump, the presidential hopeful, really scared the Chinese. They say, well, probably rapprochement in the relationship between Moscow and the United States will help back to Asia, will help restrict the Chinese influence, will help alienate Russia from China, to drive a wedge between Moscow and Beijing. Do you think now we can enjoy a big relief?
You know, even at the beginning stage, when some people worried about this perhaps possible change from this policy from Washington to Moscow, I think that we need to find out or make clear what's the different part of the relations, firstly between China and Russia, and between United States and Russia. Because as we know, indeed, no matter which kind of personal feeling or individual feeling from Mr. Trump to Mr. Putin, but we need to find out this structural, problem or structural issue for these two countries. If we take account of this kind of a strategic competition between Russia and the United States, and also a kind of irrelevance of trade between two countries.
Excuse me, Mr.
Yes.
Cui, I'm a little bit surprised by your analysis on one of the structural problems, which is the competition.
Right.
Russia has been brutally reduced to a remote second-class major power with the demise of the former Soviet Union, despite the formidable nuclear arsenal that could still destroy the United States over and over. And Russia is the only nuclear power that could get the job done that way. Well, it can never be done, by the way, because it's the theory of.
No.
My point of the question is, Mr. Che and Rick, are there any serious competitions between the United States, the sole superpower in the wake of the end of the Cold War, and Russia, whose economy is almost a negative growth?
No.
Rick?
I'd say there's no economic competition.
No.
Because, I mean, Russia is at a level below France, Germany, Britain. I mean, it's sort of in the ballpark with Italy in that second tier globally. But in terms of pushing out its power, Putin has been doing that. You can see it, and especially in Syria. And I mean, I think that there's been a really interesting reversal during the campaign. Donald Trump was attacking China over and over and over again, and he was saying good things about Russia. But since he's been president, he has been saying good things about China, and we've seen the opposite with Russia. I think it's really important for us to look at what President Putin does next, because he's looking at these reversals in the United States. He's looking at domestic politics, which is very uncertain in the U.S., and he has to figure out how to work next. He can't push economically, so it's militarily, diplomatically is where he has to push.
Thank you so much. I believe Alexander Lukin is listening, and I'd like to go to him for his comments on the issue of Syria. Now, Mr. Lukin, previously, the Trump administration said it would no longer care about the legitimacy of the Assad regime. Let it go, let it be. And it's Russia which has played the pivotal role in putting an end to the civil strife in this war-torn country of the Middle East. Now, with the use of chemical weapons, it could be the turning point, if not the game changer. And it seems that unless and until Russia agrees to or yield to the pressure for the removal of President Assad, the economic sanctions would not be lifted, and there would not be a coalition against the ISL. And Russia has terminated the exchange of intelligence reports with your American friends about how to fight terrorism in the Middle East. So what's going to happen next in the Middle East, Alexander Lukin?
Well, as I said, it's a weak administration. One indication is that they cannot decide themselves what they want, because just today the defense minister said that they still don't want to remove Assad, but they want to only Russia to apply pressure so that he does not use the chemical weapons. But other people in the administration say that they want to remove him. So you never really know what they want. And it's difficult to deal with such people. But anyway, whatever happens there, I think that the United States has a very limited influence in Syria. The main players there are Turkey, Russia, and Iran. So we should talk, our three countries should talk about it, about the final settlements, and never mind about the United States. In general, in this region, I think Russia should also talk with other major players such as Israel, and the United States should really decide what they want, because it's unclear what the position is on Israel. He also changed it quite a lot, Mr. Trump. He's changing his position on Syria. I don't know what he's going to do with Iran, because
you're right,
at first
Mr.
he was very tough. Very easy to be tough on Iran.
You're right, Mr.
You never really
Lukin.
know. We should wait and see.
You're right, Mr. Lukin. The United States is not only talking to Russia, the major player in the Middle East, it has to talk to Turkey and Iran, the close allies of Russia on Syria. Thank you so much for being with us. That's a Russian expert of international studies standing by in Moscow on satellite. Welcome back. Let's look at the style of Rex Tillerson's diplomacy. When he was traveling to China, he only brought on board his plane one reporter, and one reporter only. He kept a low profile, and that may have created margin for criticism from the crusade of the media. What do you think of this part of the learning curve for Rex Tillerson, who used to be the
ExxonMobil CEO.
Yeah,
well, he is not used to this kind of public scrutiny. For one thing, as a CEO, he was low profile he controlled his media access. Right now, he's the spokesman for the United States on foreign policy. I think he clearly doesn't enjoy that role as being a public spokesperson. He has a CEO mentality, and you need to have some sort of diplomatic mentality, I think, to be successful in that role. But I don't think it's just the media that's been criticizing him for not being very open. He's been criticized a lot in Washington because he's not clear about where the United States stands. He is on Syria. He has enunciated different position than President Trump at the same time. I mean, even what he said on his way to Moscow is different than what President Trump is saying
Probably,
in Washington.
Rick, probably you're barking at the wrong tree. It's not that Secretary Tillerson has no idea about where the United States should stand. It's his commander-in-chief. It's the big boss, the president, who has no clear idea about where the American foreign policy should be headed for.
Well, and where we tie it together is that Tillerson is out of the loop. The decisions are being made at the White House. He's trying to defend a decision that was made a day before while the policy is changing without his White House. So he's in a very difficult position. He and the press secretary are two of the people in Washington I feel for the most because they're trying to defend positions that are changing while they're talking.
Mr. Tree, do you think Secretary Tillerson deserves credit for being pro-China? Because by the end of his trip to Beijing, he was almost repeating what President Xi Jinping stood for in the new type of major power relationship: no conflict, no confrontation, seeking co-prosperity, mutual respect. Now, everything was said by President Xi Jinping to shape a new relationship with a major power, because we are accused of being assertive, and we don't seek any confrontation with the big brother. What do you think of his very friendly and nice image for China?
Yes, exactly. As we know that so far we are, confused if there is a clear strategy by Mr. Trump and his team on China, on Russia. But indeed, I think in the eyes of Mr. Trump and Mr. Tillerson, China and Russia is different because as we know, how about this relevance, economic relevance between China and the United States? The last year, the bilateral trade is more than 500 billion US dollars. But how about the irrelevance of economic and trade relation between Russia and the United States? It's just 30 billion US dollars for last year. So we can find out if Mr. Trump will follow its commitment of American first and to improve this industries and trade with other economies. I think China certainly. United States and the American government will try to have some more.
Yes, indeed. Facts and figures are pretty convincing in drawing a rosy picture between the United States and China. Last year alone, for example, the fiscal year of 2016 witnessed the creation of up to 1 million jobs because of the robust trade between the biggest and the second biggest economy in the world. Thank you for being with us. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.